Before we jump into the sermon, I just want to give am I really echoey? I feel like it. Okay. I just want to give a praise. Chris Krumrines asked me to give this praise because he said that he didn't know if he could make it through it. But his father has been dealing with cancer, and they just got test results back, and his cancer is gone. He is cancer-free. So he just wanted to give praise. He said, I want to give God praise for the miracle that he worked, and just thank you for your prayers. Everyone, I know we were praying for on the prayer chain. So thank you for that. God is good. He still does miracles. Last week, I gave a challenge for everyone, and over the next 7 weeks or 8 weeks, I challenged us to read through the book of Mark. And I said, if we begin reading and read 2 chapters a week, and during the next several weeks, I will be preaching from the 2 chapters that we were supposed to read that previous week. So this week was chapter 1 and chapter 2. And I don't know if you read along, and if you haven't read along, that's okay. You can catch up. It's all right. But I just want to challenge you to read Mark. Next week, we're going to read 3 and 4, and I'll be preaching from one of those chapters. But just want to begin to remind you to continue to read Mark. Ask yourself, how did it go? In fact, it was actually, I love, like I said last week, Mark is my favorite book of the Bible. I love it because it's action-packed. And as I started preparing for this, I was so excited because there's like so many great events, especially just in chapter 1 and 2, there's so many great events that I was like, I want to preach on that. I want to preach on that. What would I preach on? I had trouble. In fact, there was like multiple sermons that I worked on this week because I didn't know which one to preach on. One was on, there's this wonderful event where Jesus heals a man with leprosy. And then after he heals him, he says, don't tell anyone. And I always thought, oh man, why would he tell that man not to tell anyone? There's another one where these guys, actually these friends, and a lot of us know this from, if you grew up in the church, you've probably heard this many times, where these friends get this guy on top of a roof, they want him healed, and they dig a hole in the roof and they lay him down, and then Jesus says, because of their faith, you're healed. I thought, oh man, that preaches. But I'm not going to hit any of those 2. Maybe I'll save those for somewhere down the road. This morning, I want to focus on one thing. I want to focus on a present or a gift. Focus on a gift that we have been given. A gift that God has given us. You know, I love giving my kids gifts. I don't know if you like to do this too, but I love Christmas time. I love their birthdays when they, trying to pick out the perfect gift, and they open it up and their eyes light up. But one thing that I've always wanted is that when I give a gift to someone, especially my kids, I want them to enjoy it and have fun with it. Don't we? As parents, we want them to enjoy it. Like when my boys were younger, they were really into Nerf guns. And so I loved going to Walmart, finding the best Nerf gun and giving it to them. And then not just like, oh, wow, this is a great Nerf gun, and then put it down. It was like, okay, now that you got a Nerf gun, let's have a Nerf war. And so my house would just turn into like this big battle of Nerf war. We had Nerf wars all the time. It was great. And of course, I always had to go buy myself a Nerf gun too. And mine was always bigger and better because I can't lose to them in a Nerf war. But right, I would get them a Nerf gun. I want them to play with it. I had a friend growing up that would get gifts, and instead of playing with it, he would collect the toys. And that's okay. I don't know if anybody in here likes to collect toys, but he was a toy collector instead of a toy player. He would get Star Wars figurines, and instead of taking them out of the package, he would stick them up on a shelf. And I'm like, what are you doing? Or Micro Machines. I don't know if you remember those little tiny cars. He had hundreds of Micro Machines, all in the package. Does anybody remember Beanie Babies? Right? My sister and my sister, I think, collected Beanie Babies, and she'd get the Beanie Baby, and then she'd get the little tag, the protector that you'd put on the tag, and collect them. And my Beanie Babies, the first thing I'd do is rip off the tag, and then they'd battle each other. Right? This morning, I want to look at that God has given us a gift. He's given us a present. I feel like in the past, and even sometimes now, that we've turned that present, that gift, into something that it's not. We've stopped enjoying it. We've either stopped enjoying it or we refuse to even just accept the gift that he has given us. And this morning, I just want to take a look at that and see what we can learn. Mark chapter 2. Mark chapter 2, verse 23 is where we're going to pick up. It's right at the end of Mark chapter 2. So if you didn't finish your reading, you missed this one. But Mark chapter 2, verse 23 is where we're going to begin. And Jesus, the background of what has happened so far is Jesus has begun teaching, he's begun doing miracles, he's gathering his disciples, and he's doing some great things. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law are beginning to not like Jesus that much because he keeps overturning some of their traditions. In fact, right before this passage, he's questioned about his disciples, well, why aren't they fasting? Like John's disciples and like we are. And Jesus says, well, you don't fast when we're having a party. And Jesus is like, I'm here right now, so we're having a party. There will be time for fasting later. So we pick up. It says this, one Sabbath, Jesus was going through the grain fields, and his disciples walked along, and they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath? There's a couple things we need to understand as we begin to read this is the Pharisees. I know a lot of times they've gotten a bad name in church, but Pharisees, they were the ones they saw themselves as the keeper of the laws of Moses. The Pharisees were dedicated to live under the law of Moses. They were dedicated to live and study the laws. They dedicated themselves to memorizing the laws and interpreting them and sharing with others how to live out those laws, how to keep them. They were like the ultimate Orthodox Jews. Their entire life was dedicated to living out the laws that God had given them. One of the laws, one of the 10 commandments that was given was remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And that wasn't the only time it talked about the Sabbath, and multiple times there's other scriptures that talks about resting from work on the Sabbath. The Pharisees got together, and over the years, they began to say, well, what does that mean? What does it mean to keep the Sabbath day holy? What does it mean to not work? What does it mean to rest? They started asking those questions. Well, what does it mean to remember? And they broke it down. They began to break down every word. What does holy mean? What does work mean? What does remember mean? And then they began to define what that meant and what they could and couldn't do. They were trying to figure out what they could do, or what they couldn't do, the letter of the law. Or maybe even deeper, the meaning of the law. It's like when our children, when our children just began to get to the age where the punishment turned into grounding, they would always try to figure out exactly what we meant when we'd say, well, they had Kindles back then. They had little Kindle Fires, and they would play video games on their little Kindle Fires. If anybody knows what that, just little tablets. There's one time, I don't know which child it was, but we were like, you are grounded, whatever they did, you're grounded from your Kindle. Like, okay. Well, what about the Xbox? I can't play games on my Kindle, but can I play games on my Xbox? No, you can't play games on the Xbox. Well, what about your Nintendo, Dad? No, you can't play. Well, what about, okay, you know what? You're grounded from electronics. All electronics. Well, then the next question is, well, can I watch someone else play on their electronics? Does anybody else have their children do this? Right? Let's define where the line is. Can I watch my brother or sister play on electronics? No. In fact, you're grounded from being inside. Go outside. Well, can I take my metal detector outside? Because technically that's an electronic. Am I allowed doing my metal? You know what? Just leave, right? Just okay. But they want to define the specifics. Where's the line? Give me the specific details of what I can and cannot do. That's what the rabbis and the Pharisees did. They would sit down and they say, well, can I walk to the store? Well, no, you can't walk to the store because that's not rest. Okay, but how far can I walk? Well, they actually made a rule. You can walk 3,000 feet. Okay, 3,000 feet, that right up to 3,000 feet. Well, what about, can I carry a basket while I walk? Well, no, you can't carry a basket while you walk because that's working. Well, can I carry a stick? No, not a stick. Well, how about a dried fig? Can I carry a dried fig while I walk because I might get hungry? In fact, we have to eat. And they're like, okay, you know what? We'll say this. You can carry a dry fig while you walk up to 3,000 feet, but you can't, nothing more or nothing bigger than a dried fig. We're like, okay, well, good. That means I can carry a needle. Wait, no. Don't carry a needle, because if you carry a needle, you might be tempted to sew something, and that would be working. So you can carry anything smaller than a fig, but not a needle, so that you don't work. In fact, they went on like this, and they actually created 24 chapters in a book, the Mishnah Shabbat, 24 chapters on how to keep the Sabbath laws. A lot of times we're like, oh, I can't believe it, but you know what? They were just trying to obey. They just wanted to obey the law. So they put in things like, you can't take a bath because just if you take a bath, if you splash the water on the floor and you begin to clean it, it's cleaning. My favorite one was women could not look in mirrors on the Sabbath because they were afraid that they would pull a gray hair. Apparently that was even back then. I don't know. That's what the research said. I don't know. But here's the thing. They have these rules in place so that you can obey the law. And here comes Jesus' disciples. They're coming along and they're walking through this grain field and they reach out and they grab some grain, they rub it in their hand, they begin to eat it. The Pharisees are like, they just broke 2 laws right there, 2 of them. First, you're plucking grain, you're harvesting. You're not allowed to harvest. That's one of the laws. What are you doing? And second, you began to rub them in your hand. That's working right there. And the Pharisees had a fit. They're like, how can these men claim to be good Jews? How can these men claim to be good, godly men if they don't even obey the Sabbath laws? How can they say they love God when they don't even do what he says? How can you claim to teach in God's name if you're disobeying these laws? So they approached Jesus and they said, look what you're doing. And then Jesus answered them. Verse 25, he answered, have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. Then he also gave some to his companions. Jesus looked at him and he took someone that they regarded so highly, King David, and he says, do you remember what King David did? Actually, David wasn't king at that time. Do you remember what David did? David actually, what happened, he reminds me, he says, David was running away from Saul. This is when David finally found out that Saul was about to kill him. This is in 1 Samuel 20-something. David's running away from King Saul. And he runs into the tabernacle as he begins to run away, and he goes up to the priest and says, listen, I'm hungry. We need some bread for me and my men. Give me some bread. And the priest says, listen, the only bread I have is that has been consecrated to God. Meaning there's only bread that we have and only the priests are allowed to eat it. And David said, well, give it to me. So he gave it to him. And David also got a sword. And David knew where the bread came from. David knew back in Exodus that God said there's only certain people that are allowed to eat that bread. And in fact, it's those that are serving, the priests. It's Aaron and his sons shall eat it in a holy place. So Jesus looks at him and says, well, David didn't follow the laws. David didn't follow your laws. Actually, this one was actually one that God gave, not just one that they wrote. So David didn't follow those, and he was still considered righteous. And then Jesus flips things around. Jesus flips things around. He takes the kingdom and he almost just flips their kingdom upside down, and he says this. If you're an underliner, underline this one right here. It says, then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath. He said the Sabbath was made for man. Jesus paused and he said, listen, I think you're getting things backwards here. The Sabbath was made for us. The Sabbath, it is one of God's loving gifts to man, to us. So what is the Sabbath? What is it for? We find the Sabbath all the way back in the beginning in Genesis when God created everything. God creates everything. He creates the world. He creates everything in 6 days. And then on the seventh day, he rested. Why? It says he does that so he can give us an example of the gift that he wants us to receive. The original purpose for Sabbath, and it says in Exodus, it says, 6 days you shall labor and do all of your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. It says work for 6 days. And then on the seventh day, it's a Sabbath. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. The first thing that we find out is this. The Sabbath is a day that's set aside to worship God. The Sabbath, it's a day that we just set aside and worship our Lord. We continue to find different teachings of the Sabbath in Deuteronomy 5. It says this, that the Lord reminds his people that they had been slaves in Egypt. And he brought them out of Egypt, and commanding them, after he brought them out of Egypt, says, I want you to start observing the Sabbath. I want you to start taking a weekly day of rest so that you can look back and remember the times where you were slaves where you couldn't do that. And he associates the Israel's slavery in Egypt and not being able to rest with the Sabbath and being free. The second purpose of the Sabbath, the first is to worship the Lord. The second day is actually rest, bodily rest. If you realize this, but two of the greatest needs of men today, and women, two of our greatest needs are for rest and worship. In fact, God reminds the Israelites as they're becoming free from Egypt, you weren't free to do that when you were slaves, but now that you're free to have Sabbath. So we are free in Christ. Our purpose for the Sabbath, the gift of the Sabbath, is a day of bodily rest and worship. God has given us a gift. He says, this is for you. I have a gift for you. I give you a day to rest and worship. Let me say this a different way. Isn't this amazing that God says, I'm going to give you permission. Okay? So God, I am giving you permission to relax for 1 day a week. I am giving you permission. In fact, I want you to take a day to relax. When Jesus was approached with the Sabbath, when they said, well, why don't they recognize the Sabbath? Jesus didn't say, okay, no more Sabbath, no more rest. He said, no, you know what, the Sabbath, the rest is for you. It's for each and every one of you. I made it for you. I want you to receive it. I want you to take it. I give you permission to take it. Is there anything our society needs more than a time of rest and a time of worship? Here's what I've realized over the years, that over the years, especially throughout church history, there's become almost two wrong views of the Sabbath. The first view is actually one that I kind of grew up in a little bit, but is the legalistic view. Almost the view that the Pharisees had, where it was, okay, we are going to take a Sabbath because we have to, and we have to obey everything. When I was little, it was on Sunday was the Sabbath that we would take, and on Sunday you couldn't do anything. If you were a real Christian, right? Real Christian, quote unquote. You had to go to Sunday school. You had to go to Sunday morning church. You couldn't do anything until Sunday night church, and then you had to go to Sunday night church, and that was your Sabbath. That's what you knew. That's how you knew if you believed in God or not. My grandpa Bush, my grandpa growing up, he was a Seventh-day Adventist, which means he practiced the Sabbath on sundown Friday night till sundown Saturday night, and then we would go to his house once a year, and it's usually during Thanksgiving time, which is a whole different story for another time. But I remember on the Sabbath, it would, as Friday night went down, you did nothing. Everyone sat in the living room. They used as bare minimal electricity as they could. And the only thing you were allowed to do was listen to the radio. I remember going there, and it was like taking a gift. It was like God saying, here's this amazing gift, and then you take the gift and you leave it in the box. You say, don't play with it. Don't touch it. Don't enjoy the Sabbath. So there's one way. But then I've noticed, especially more recently, the second view of a Sabbath is just to ignore it. Just ignore it, to say, you know what, that's no good, because you know what, we are too busy. Aren't we? I mean, we're too busy. In fact, we're usually proud of being busy. If we're not busy, well, then we must be lazy, right? I mean, how many times do you have this conversation? Someone comes in, hey, how are you doing? Oh man, I am so busy. Right? And then, oh yeah, I'm busy too. Oh, and then we begin to compare calendars, and we get out our calendar. Mine's over here. And I'm, oh man, what are you doing this week? Oh, I'm going to bring up my calendar, and it looks like a Christmas tree. There's so many dates on it and lights on it, and it's just like, wow, what do you have? I've got all kinds of stuff. I am so busy. Well, what about next month? Oh no, that's full too. And we can compare calendars like, wow. And it's almost like we're proud in being busy. It's almost like our society says you have to have busyness in your life. There's actually sometimes, every once in a while, and I'll have a day where there's no color, nothing on it on the calendar. And I'm not going to lie to you, I almost feel the need to put something on there. Like, oh man, how can I not have something that day? What do I do? What do I do? I mean, that's almost like refusing a gift. It'd be like your parents coming up saying, here, I've got this wonderful gift, and you're like, no thanks. I know I need it. I know I want that. Oh, I know it would be amazing to have the biggest Nerf gun battle in the world. But no thanks. No thanks. Neither one of these is a good thing. I think we've swung so far towards the second one where busyness is killing us. Literally, it is killing us. The amount of stress, the amount of work, the amount of lack of rest that we have in our lives and in our society is causing anxiety and depression and heart problems. We're getting on medicine. It is literally killing us. We are working ourselves to death. I don't know if you remember that B movie a long time ago where it says, oh, we worked ourselves so that, or we studied so that we can work ourselves to death. I forget how it goes. I had the quote earlier in my head. You know what the cure for busyness is? The cure for all of those problems right there, the cure for busyness is the gift of Sabbath. It is the gift of rest. And I know when we say that, it's like, but I won't get this done. I'm too busy. I can't rest for a day, because if I do, I'm not going to get this done. You know what? The Israelites said the same thing in the desert. The Israelites were roaming through the desert and they said, God, we can't take a day of rest. If we do, we're not going to have food. We're not going to have this. And God said, I'm going to send you manna, and every day that manna at night, it's going to go bad. So whatever you don't collect, it goes bad, except for one time. Every Sabbath, the day before the Sabbath, you collect the manna, and you know what? It's not going to go bad for that day. God said, I know you're too busy, and I know you don't think it can happen, but I'll take care of it. I'll take care of it. We say, but God, I won't get this done, but God, if I take a day off, if I take a day of rest, if I actually take a Sabbath, well, that means I can't do this. And fill in the thing that you can't do. Well, God, I can't do, you know what, as teens, a lot of times it's sports. Well, I can't do this sport if I'm going to take a day off. I can't do this work. I can't do this extra job if I take that day off. And God says, you know what, you're right. You can't. You're going to have to give something up. If you want to receive this amazing gift, this gift that is made for us, is made for you, you'll probably have to give something up. But God says, that's okay, because I will take care of you. I will take care of it. God took the Sabbath so far with the Israelites that he said, you know what? There's going to be a time where not only a Sabbath day of the week, I want you to take an entire year and not plant anything. I know we have a couple farmers in here. Imagine God saying, you know what, don't plant anything this year. Okay. How do I survive? God says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Trust God. He will take care of it. If you feel like you are too busy and too stressed and too overwhelmed, maybe you need a Sabbath. If you feel like you are overworked, maybe you need a Sabbath. Maybe you need a time every week to set aside a day and say, I'm going to rest and worship God today. My Sabbath is on Friday. I don't know if you've ever noticed, but the church is closed on Friday, and I don't usually answer my phone on Friday because I have tried my best to say, okay, God, if you want me to take a Sabbath, I'm going to do my best, and I'm going to take Friday as my Sabbath. I don't take Sunday as my Sabbath, well, because I'm working. And I do my best to try to rest as best as I can, try to do things that I enjoy, and take that day off for my family, for me, and for God. A lot of people take Sunday as their Sabbath. I ask our worship team to come forward as I... There's this great restaurant, and you've probably heard of it, called Chick-fil-A, right? What's the one thing everyone knows about Chick-fil-A?
Closed on Sunday.
It's closed on Sunday. Kathy, the man who started Chick-fil-A a long time ago, he said his first restaurant, him and his brother, when they started it, said, we are not going to open on Sunday, because they believed in a day of rest. They believed in a Sabbath. There is a business article written just a couple years ago about Chick-fil-A, and it says, you know what, it's estimated because they close on Sunday that they lose about $1.2 billion a year of revenue. When they decided to expand, they said, you know what, there's no way you can stay open and run your business yet close all of them on Sunday. You will go under. You're not going to make it. But it has outgrown almost every fast food restaurant since it's been open. The employee satisfaction, they have the highest employee satisfaction of all fast food restaurants. In fact, there was one business article that saw it was a business genius move to close on Sunday because it skyrocketed their sales during the week because everyone knew they couldn't get it on Sunday. All because a guy said, you know what, we need a day of rest. We need a Sabbath. So my challenge for you this morning is, are you taking a day of rest? Are you accepting the gift that was created for you? Not to put you under the thumb, not that you have to obey all these rules, but as a gift, so that you can rest, that you can worship the Lord. This morning, let's stand. Just ask yourself, what am I doing with the gift that God has given me?